Nothing is more important to the success of a startup than the first 10 engineers you hire. That's why I started First 10. Hi, I'm Boris Epstein, CEO of First 10, and with me is my colleague,
Alexis Munger. Hi. At First 10, we work with early founders to help build early engineering teams.
And this is the First 10 podcast, where we bring you valuable insights on building early engineering teams from all sides of the equation. Engineers, founders, even investors. On today's episode of the First 10 podcast, we're talking about how Stripe built its early engineering team.
Yes.
This is something that I'm personally fascinated with, and I know founders that are building their teams express interest in this as well. I came up in recruiting at a time when Stripe was noticed in like almost an outlier fashion as being able to build this really incredible early engineering team. And it was just really curious how company was able to do that while building what they were building, I think was what was most curious. They're a payments product, and payments weren't historically known for being a place that great talent wanted to work with or kind of solve the problem of. Mm-hmm. So I was curious that this company came on the scene, and all of a sudden all these great engineers were working there or attracted to working there. So we're excited to talk a little bit about how Stripe did that.
Yeah.
Now, transparently, right? So neither Alexis or I worked with Stripe to help them build this team. We were doing other things. I'll share a little bit about what I was doing at the time, and Alexis, you can share as well. Yeah. We did work with Stripe as a company back in like 2017, 2018, but that was way later when Stripe was already larger and more established.
Yeah, we saw the aftermath.
We saw the aftermath.
Yeah.
So we were competing with Stripe when they were building that early team. So we could talk a little bit about what we were doing and how that kind of felt from a competitor perspective. So this pod is more from the place of enthusiast, from the place of case studying how a company with a great talent bar like Stripe built its early team. And a big foundation for this podcast is an article that was written by First Round, where they were able to extract insight from Stripe's founding engineer, Greg Brockman. So we'll reference quite a bit of that article when talking through this pod.
Awesome.
So let's jump into it. As I'm sure everybody knows, so Stripe was founded by John and Pat Collison, two brothers, in late 2010. Pat was coming out of MIT at the time, John out of Harvard. And the goal was to make it easy for businesses to accept payments online. That's Stripe. Today, Stripe is valued at around $50 billion per their latest valuation, as high as $100 billion. In a former round, employs around 7,000 people, including thousands of developers. From a place of hiring, it's known as having one of the highest qualities of software engineers in the market. Mm-hmm. And again, this pod is going to focus on how Stripe built its early team. And we work with a lot of different founders.
Yes, we do. Right? We do. Yeah. We work, do you ever come across founders that when we're like, what do you think about, because we always do like these, what companies do you admire? Where do you want to see engineers from? And I think almost every single time we ask that question, usually Stripe comes up in the mix. I don't think we've ever had like a client that was like, oh, I don't like Stripe engineers. Like that just doesn't happen. It's pretty ubiquitous. And so I think it's interesting to find out why is that? Why have they built such a strong engineering culture? And why is it still strong? Because that also is like interesting to me that the talent density is still high, even when they're at like 7,000 employees. So I think going back to the start of it is interesting.
I think that's right. They're one of the few talent brands that hasn't done wrong. If you look at other companies that have great quality engineers, and there's great engineers, and then there's usually something that had kind of gone down in that company's trajectory that may have, harmed or had an impact on its talent brand. Stripe isn't one of those companies. Stripe has done really well from the beginning and continues to do well today. Something that the world might not necessarily know. I think now's as good a time as any to say it. But the First 10 brand, so First 10, we work with founders to build their early engineering teams. It's based on the premise that there's nothing more important to the success of a startup than the first 10 engineers they hire, because the first 10 will impact the next 10, and so on and so forth. we were always really excited about working with early stage, but the specific name First 10 and the concept First 10, I heard Pat Collison talk about that in an interview. He talked about the importance of the first 10 engineers and the first 10 impacting the second 10. And I have a clip of him saying that and just really resonated because it's in that mold that we envision the impact and benefit of double, triple, quadrupling down on the quality of that early team. Because it really is like going back to the beginning, right? Like the stronger the founders, the stronger the first engineer that they'll be able to attract, the stronger the first engineer that they'll be able to attract, the stronger the remaining 10, the stronger the first 10, the stronger the second 10, right? Because engineers look at, the existing team that they'll be potentially joining. And the stronger that team is, the higher the likely it is that they'll be interested in being a part of it.
So, Boris, how did they do it?
I think what you'll find is that it wasn't rocket science, but here are some of the steps that Stripe took to build its early team. So this isn't mentioned in the article, but I think the first thing that they agreed to is that there's nothing more important than the quality of that early team. So I think it was that commitment that laid the basis for all of this. But the first thing that they did is they tried candidates across all channels. So they treated recruiting like marketing. And, if you think about marketing, you have customers that can come in through a number of different channels. You invest in what it takes for those channels to be successful, then you measure. And where you see effectiveness, you double, triple, quadruple down. So in recruiting, you have channels like referrals, inbound, candidates that respond to applications is inbound. Outbound is when you reach out to a candidate to try to get them interested. You have career fairs, you have agencies, right? So let's say those are all the channels. So Stripe invested in identifying and attracting talent across all of those channels. At the basis of all of those channels is the email, the pitch, right? The pitch most commonly when communicated to engineers is in the form of an email, right? Engineers aren't cold calling each other or responding to cold calls, so it's an email. And so Stripe's taken time to make sure that the email that they use in the outbound is as well crafted as it possibly can be. They use some pretty neat techniques to really hone their email, which is using the language or context from rejection emails to inform how to more ideally craft the outbound message. So I thought that was a pretty neat technique.
It's interesting too, just looking at their source of hires, is this gets super recruitery, which is really interesting to see like that, like somebody who's technical and a CTO talking about hiring channels. Cause usually I don't see that from an engineer, but you will see it from like a head of talent. So already I can tell like they definitely have like a strong recruitment game if they're already thinking about it the same way we would. And I love that. But it's interesting to kind of see how they put a lot of emphasis early on in the referral networks. And then, because normally I think when companies start to scale, they get bigger. I would almost argue that like the referral network kind of starts to go down because you kind of hit like a threshold with how many people each new hire can bring in. And then you have to start going out and finding people externally. But I love how they focused on that so early on and brought in most of their founding team through people that they know and had relationships with and were able to kind of maximize that. But they didn't forget about some of these other channels because any channel, any given, week one might lead to more activity than the other. So it's good to have balance and be able to pull different levers at all times. But I do think early stage, you should be really, really making referrals like the main one that you want to concentrate on.
Yeah, 100% agree. And, it is interesting what you mentioned that at some point, you're right, referrals do run dry. In theory, they shouldn't, right? Because if every new person that you hire could go through their network and be a contributor to some one new person, then referrals should never run dry.
Yeah.
The effort that every subsequent new hire puts into referrals, I think gets slightly diminished, maybe because they feel slightly less ownership over the responsibility to drive referrals. The founders probably feel it the most and so on and so forth. That's probably why it diminishes.
I think that's true. And I think this could be like maybe engineering culture where just because there is so much focus on recruitment and engineers get tons of emails. I know that when you do start working with engineers to kind of work through their networks, sometimes there's a little bit of reticence or hesitance to say like, oh yeah, go out, you should talk to my friend over here, do this. Like sometimes I feel like there's even a little bit like, oh no, I don't want to bother my network with this because they're probably perfectly happy. But I think that if you're an early engineer starting a new team, like you should get over that because you could be holding on to an opportunity that somebody would be really excited for. And maybe it's working again with somebody that you really liked.
And I think everything starts from the founder. So in Stripe's case, right, the founders were not shy about engaging their network, right?
Yeah.
John and Pat specifically took the time to identify the best people that they could think of, the best people that they, had encountered, and went after them, regardless of whether they were interested in new opportunities or they might have been, very happy in whatever it is they were doing. But Stripe invested in the long game of knowing that whatever effort they put in hiring the best people is going to pay dividends. And so they went after the absolute best. And you see that in the quality of their early team. And this article doesn't specifically mention it, but other content out there about how Stripe built its early team talks about the great lengths that Stripe went to convince those top engineers who they knew to eventually join them.
Yeah.
So I think it starts with the founder. The founder has to be willing to do that. And you talked about how sometimes engineers are a little shy about engaging their network, right? We'll encounter founders who are shy about engaging their network, right? And you kind of can't be that and, want to build a team as strong as Stripe's. It's not going to happen.
I agree. I think you're right. We do encounter that sometimes. And I think to your point about if you want to build like a strong engineering culture, you also have to bring a strong recruiting culture to your organization too.
Yes.
And as a founder, you're now wearing multiple hats. You're not just CTO anymore. If you're technical, you're not just product manager anymore. You're a recruiter too. You're head of talent until the day comes where you hire somebody to do that. So you should definitely be tapping your referral networks and encouraging your team to do the same.
So looking across all those channels, right? So start with a strong message, right? The message is going to be your value prop. The value prop is like the reason that somebody great should consider joining you. Now, Stripe must have had a strong version of this, right? Pat and John must have had a very compelling reason for why payments was a great business to go after and why payments was a compelling technical problem to work towards solving, right? And they must have been able to communicate that effectively to other really strong engineers to compel them to join. So if you want to attract good engineers, you need to be able to answer those two questions. Why is this a compelling business problem? Why is this the compelling technical problem? Then confining that to your email. So that's the pitch.
Yeah.
And then it sounds like Stripe primarily across the set of first 10 and even subsequent 10 hires, the bulk of those came through referrals. I think Stripe punched above the average startup's weight when it comes to driving hires through referrals, right? Most founders can hire a handful of people through referrals.
Yeah.
I think it's hard to get to the success level that Stripe got to. And then over the longer term game, most referral channels drive about 20% of startup hires. And so it's a very important muscle, especially in early stage. It's a very important muscle to upkeep as you continue to grow. But then so are other channels, right? Inbound and outbound as well.
But I also think if you're taking this as a perspective, recruiting is just marketing. All of those things are in service of one another. So if you're going out and you're doing lots of canvassing through your network, through referrals, you're doing the outbound, you're doing all these different things, eventually all of that work will start to trickle into having that talent, that strong talent attracted to you and coming to you. And you should see like that come through and like your inbound, like as companies kind of start to get going and they have brand recognition, applicant qualities are applicant qualities. It's always kind of going to be like a little bit of a crapshoot. But if you're doing the right things and like you're creating the right talent brand and thinking about that early, that inbound channel should start to actually have some quality to it. But it starts with like being able to sort of generate that energy from, just going out and doing it yourself.
Agreed. Now, when taking a look at the channels, it looks like Stripe did engage contingency recruiters as a channel for hiring, and that ended up not netting great success for Stripe. Again, Stripe's premise is to turn on all of the channels and then measure which ones are going to drive effectiveness and then triple down on those from there. It turned out that referrals was the main driver. And so they tripled and continued to invest.
Yeah.
First 10 obviously wasn't around back then. So maybe, Stripe would have seen more success if First 10 was around back then. But today, what we see as an ideal mix for founders is what Stripe says. So founders should be investing in referrals. Founders should be investing in working with an outside partner, because an outside partner could drive new candidate flow that they would not have access to otherwise.
Right.
And then, subsequent other channels, then measuring what ultimately is most effective, and then double tripling down from there.
I think on that note too, just thinking about, contingency recruiters and whether or not that's an avenue to try. I absolutely think it is. I don't think that all contingency firms are the same or operate the same, especially what we're seeing the recruiting model in contingency look like these days versus what it was in 2010 when they first started doing these.
Sure.
One thing that came out of a lot of recruiters being displaced in 2023 is a lot of these internal recruiters went out and started their own thing. Hello, like First 10, we're doing the same thing. And so I think that there has been a boon in a lot of different contingency models that are so much better than they were back in 2010 out of that. So I don't know. It's good to know. I think the moral of the story there is work with a contingency firm that maybe you got a referral from your VC network, or, you talk to the recruiters that are doing that firm, make sure you all are on the same page and understand, have the same understanding of what recruiting should look like, because they're not all the same.
Fair. So once you have that baseline set up, once you're thinking about recruiting like marketing, then there's some other techniques that Stripe used that we thought was interesting. So don't take circumstantial evidence as authoritative. So that's something that Stripe took to heart. An example of that is, just because Google happens to have a strong talent brand, or in this case, if you're a founder, just because Stripe happens to have a good talent brand, don't assume that anyone who comes from that respective company is as, great as you need them to be. Right. So Stripe didn't do that. Stripe didn't assume that just because someone came from Google, they were as great as they needed to be great for Stripe. So they designed an interview process that was able to suss out what they kind of refer to as great from good. Right. So not someone that could just kind of, generally pass an interview process, but how could you tell if this person is kind of great enough to be, worthy of that early founding engineer hire or early team member hire?
I think that they talked a little bit too about using a collaborative project, which is interesting because I think in this series, we've talked to other engineers about, creating a really good interview process. And this theme comes up again and again about how do you technically vet for these skills? And this collaborative paired programming projects, things like that come up a lot. So I think it's interesting. I'm wondering, or I'm curious, when you're doing a collaborative hack project, for instance, if that's what Stripe used, do they weight the collaboration part of it more heavily than the technical ability, or you put technical ability first and then the collaboration skill second? What do you think is more important? Both?
I don't know in Stripe's case, but my guess is that they overweighted the technical aspect. So the ability to solve the problem, the speed by which they solve the problem, the cleanliness of the design. If Stripe's trying to hire the top engineers in the Valley to be a part of their early 10 team, then they're going to need that person to be of the best technologists, be of the best engineers in their respective space. I think collaboration is nice, but I don't think collaboration will outweigh that kind of fundamental technical ability. But I don't know.
I would hope that they place equal. They would equally weight it, because think about it this way. And we've heard this a lot. It doesn't matter how technically good, if you're a jerk and nobody wants to collaborate with you, that's kind of a red flag, right? Especially for early teams, and goes back to the culture stuff that we talk about too, and how important that piece of it is. And we've heard from several founders already, how they want to know that they can get in the trenches with this person to work with them, and everybody's going to have each other's back. So I just wonder, what did they talk about? I don't think we'll ever know the answer to that, but I'm curious.
I don't know either. And it's interesting. I think, Stripe must have done it in a certain way. And I think for founders that are listening to this and wanting to emulate the building of their team in this regard, it's design something into your interview process that could suss out, right, the good from the great, right? If you want to hire the best, right, is your interview process designed to filter for that best? I think that's the goal in this case.
Yeah.
On the point of collaboration, and is this someone that I want to spend my time with? So an interesting technique that Stripe used in building the early team is something that they called the Sunday test. So if the person who you're interviewing were alone in the office all day Sunday, would you want to spend your time with this person? Would you be more likely to go into the office because this person's there, or less likely because this person is there? If the person seems to be someone who you'd enjoy spending time with, who you'd enjoy learning from, who you'd enjoy collaborating with, who you would enjoy working on problems together, then that person passes the Sunday test. If the person seems like a jerk, not someone you would enjoy spending a full day with, then that person doesn't pass the Sunday test. And it's kind of cool that a company who has, such a high technical bar would place equal weight or kind of unconditional weight on Sunday test, on ensuring that people who join are people that everyone would want to work with.
I like that they changed it to Sunday test, because it used to be, and I don't know if you remember this, everybody would say, they would call it like the beer test. Like, would you want to go and have a beer with this person?
Yeah. I've heard beer. I've heard airplane, the airplane test.
Yeah. And I think it's good. I think it's also like pretty fitting. You don't necessarily have to go have beers with everybody every night. Maybe you don't drink, but do you want to work in an office on Sundays with this person if you had to? It's pretty telling.
Yeah.
It's a good framework.
I think it's very telling, and I think it can be pretty universally applied.
Yeah.
So if you're an engineer listening to this, right, kind of keep in mind that the company that's evaluating you is, partly evaluating you for your technical skill, but also partly evaluating you for, are you someone that the team would enjoy working with?
Yeah.
So that's one. And then flip, right? If you're an engineer evaluating a startup, you want to, interview not only to pass, but you also want to get to know the startup. You want to get to know the team. Are these people who you would enjoy getting to know, right? And we've interviewed engineers, and they place such heavy emphasis on that connection, right? Yeah. It's kind of like a emulation of the Sunday test.
Yeah, absolutely.
One thing that they talked about that I thought was interesting is, so the first hire in a new role or department is incredibly important. I think that makes a lot of sense. Stripe talked about building its early engineering team. I don't know if they necessarily built it as all generalists. I suspect that is what they did. But in this case, when they're hiring someone for a new role or a new function or a new department, they're going out of their way by saying that that person is going to set the bar essentially for that entire function, for that entire department. Like, it's hard for someone at a certain talent quality to attract people that are better than them. It's harder. And so when they know that they're hiring the first of someone, so it could be their founding engineer, Greg Brockman, they set the bar at that person. When they were hiring their first ML engineer, when they're hiring their first, risk fraud person, or their first of whatever function, they knew that that first person is incredibly important and is going to set the bar for every, subsequent hire of that type to follow.
The other thing that I read in the article too, and maybe you're going to talk about this too in a little bit, but it sort of goes into this subject, but they hired people instead of roles. And I think that this is like such a I really like this. And I think it plays into like how you're building a team. So like if you're thinking about like, if I come across somebody good, but maybe I don't necessarily have a role for them, thinking about these people more opportunistically, but then there's also a framework for like, okay, now I'm hiring for the first of a team or looking for a certain specialty. Like, maybe don't hire opportunistically in those situations, but like there's like a sort of a schedule for green light. Okay, go after this person opportunistically, or like, no, don't do that. Hold out for like the right person for this specific team and wait on other people to kind of come in after. But I think it's really cool to think about balancing that both, where like you don't necessarily have to just hire for one thing, but you can keep an open-minded approach about looking at other skill sets and whether or not those skill sets will be useful to you in like 1 to 2 months down the road, versus only hiring for one specific thing at a time.
It's tricky for companies that are looking to expand into a new specialty. Mm-hmm. I mean, there are a couple different ways to do it. There are a couple challenges. So like one way to do it is to build more of a generalist profile and culture, and then trust in the confidence of your generalist to be able to ramp into these, extended areas.
Yeah. It's
kind of hard to hire the first of someone when you have a culture that might be a little more attuned to others. Like I'm thinking about Stripe. Let's say like all their first 10 engineers were distributed systems. I don't know if that's true, but let's just say that they were.
Yeah.
If the 11th person was a front-end hire, and if Stripe has a talent brand more associated with back-end distributed systems, it'd probably be harder to hire that first front-end person for a talent brand that's more associated with backend. Similarly, if you have a talent brand that's more associated with product people, front-end people, and more of like a design aesthetic, it's going to be harder for that brand to hire their first distributed systems
Yeah.
person. They have to think of like something new and compelling to infuse into their value proposition to attract. We see that.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point. Is you got to think about hiring, like you're not hiring just for like the immediate need, but also the future and like how you're going about and diversifying your team, long term. You got to think about the makeup of that early and think those things through, because you're right. It would be hard to like, I hear this a lot with engineers on different ends of the stack where they're like, oh, is this like largely just an analytics platform, not really consumer facing? Like, let's say that you're trying to find like a front end engineer. It's really hard to go after people like that. And you might really need somebody who's great on the front end. You want those people who think about consumer facing stuff. So you got to like diversify the talent on your team a little bit so that you can start eventually like progressing towards bringing other skill sets in.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I like the concept of hiring people instead of roles. I think too many startups focus on hiring roles instead of people. I mean, we see it all the time, right? Startups are like, we need to hire like for this role. And it makes sense when they're trying to kind of shape their team.
Yeah.
But the other version of that is like, hey, we want to hire a full 10 pack, a 10-person team of generalists. Now, maybe we want each person to skew in a slightly different area, but we want them all to be, we want 80% of their skill set to be a solid generalist. And then we want some 20%, kind of specialization in some handful of areas that are valuable to us, right? Like the fungibility of that team, the versatility of that team is going to be a lot more powerful than a team that has 5, let's say, distinct specialists. Those 5 distinct specialists are going to be a little bit less kind of maneuverable and versatile. Yeah,
I think so. I think that's right. And then I also think too, like, another thing that we'll see too is, where some companies kind of want to do like this waterfall approach to hiring where they're like, well, we got to hire this person first before we can hire these other people. But that's not sometimes how recruiting works, where like you might come across somebody who's going to be like a great hire. But if you have it in your mind that you need to hire this other person first and you miss out on that timing simply because you don't think you have the other person in place. I see that a lot too, where I'm like, no. If this person is smart and has an aptitude, and there's a good chance that in like 3 months or 4 months, whenever, when you make that hire and you go back to this person, they're not there anymore. That's going to happen. Then you're going to wish that you had just hired that person without thinking about an order of like, this role needs to come first or this role should come second. I think being open about what the timing of that should be a consideration too.
100% snag that person, right?
Yeah. You don't have to wait. There's no rules. There's no rules on waiting.
Yeah. So I think it comes down to like the priority of the founders, right? The priority, if the founders, in this case, Pat and John, believed emphatically that there's nothing more important than their first 10 engineers. I mean, they said this, right? There's nothing more important than the first 10 engineers because the first 10 will impact the second 10 and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So therefore, right, in order for Stripe to accomplish its mission, it has to double, triple, quadruple down on the strength of its early team, right?
Yeah.
That's different than a founder who says, building my product is the most important thing. I need these 5 people in order to build a product.
Yeah.
And then, working with a recruiter to hire these 5 people will help then, me have the team I need to go build a product. Those are 2 very different philosophies.
Yeah.
The philosophy that Stripe used is first focus on hiring the best quality people because it will take the best quality people to build the product. So founders that want to build a team like this, start there.
Yeah.
And that's what it takes.
Let me ask you this question. Sometimes we hear founders who are like, well, we really want very senior people in here. And maybe they already have like 3 solid, very like senior level, very autonomous working individuals. And they get a little gun shy about bringing on somebody who's like super smart, but maybe a couple years more junior. What do you think about in cases like should you, because we'll hear like, oh yeah, they seem really great, or like they'd be great for us 6 months down the road, but we just can't take on anybody junior just yet. Do you think there's any correlation to years of experience to whether or not somebody can work autonomously and whether or not you should put that on the back burner until you have like a really senior team in place? Or do you think it doesn't matter as much?
It's a big debate in the space.
Yeah.
Some people believe that years of experience don't impact in a person's ability to solve problems and be a contributor. And I believe that because, people are starting to code younger and younger. By the time someone's graduating college, sometimes even in college, maybe even in parallel with college, they've built a number of projects. They've contributed to open source.
Yeah.
they could bring a novel approach to whatever problem the startup is solving. So if you have a culture where you build software using more first principles, and you have an interview process to evaluate for the strength of someone's ability to solve a problem and then code it up into a solution, then hiring someone with less years of experience, but strong intellectual and software writing athleticism would be great for them. On the other hand, people will say things like hiring junior people will require mentorship and investment that founders don't have, so stray away from it.
Yeah. I
think the happy medium, and we heard this right from other guests who we've interviewed, the happy medium is hire a strong team of generalists and in parallel invest in early career talent. That might be the winning combination. Maybe go for a 1-for-1, or maybe hire your first 5 with experience and then
start
to invest in early career, right? Because that's going to really build that team dynamic and culture.
Yeah.
That could help the team grow.
And I think we've definitely heard that before where we've had founders, we'll ask them well, okay, here's this role. Are you open to years of experience? What's your viewpoint on that? And sometimes they'll even offer yeah, we currently have somebody on our team right now that has 3 years of experience, and they lap several other staff level engineers that we've seen, or it's not unheard of that there's somebody out there that has, on paper doesn't have that many years of professional experience, but what they have and can bring to the table is passion and drive and just a new perspective or fresh perspective on how to approach a problem.
Especially at that early stage, right? Oftentimes a startup's trying to take on an incumbent and trying to, beat out some, larger tech company.
Yeah.
And so why would that startup want to hire, an experienced person, already kind of impacted and influenced by some of those larger company practices?
Yeah.
It's those larger companies' practices that are trying to beat, right?
Yeah.
And so that's a good argument to bring in talent that, a little bit fresher, a little bit more energetic about your problem space.
I agree. Yeah.
There's multiple ways to look at it, right?
Yeah.
On the other hand, right, hiring people with experience could help you avoid problems or avoid mistakes that they may have already experienced in the future.
It's a balance. I think you need both, and you probably need them early on. I would say, I think you need somebody who understands how to scale it and knows how to grow a product and what's the end goal and has seen that come to fruition on the later stage. But you also need people who maybe have, like you said, a fresh perspective on it.
I think it comes back to the founder. Yeah. And so if the founder is required to make a list, right? The founder has to make a list of, let's say, the top 50 people who they know.
Yeah.
Right? If a founder's tasked with that exercise, that'd probably be a hard exercise because no one could probably think of 50 people off the top of their head.
No.
But if a founder sits down and they write down, okay, who are the 10 best people at my last company? Who are the 10 best people at the company I worked at before then? Who are the 10 best people who I know in the industry? Who are the 10 best people who I went to school with? I don't care what these people are up to right now, but who's the best?
Yeah.
According to my view of the world, right? Then that person writes down that list of 50. Then maybe they could see what they have in common. Maybe 90% of those people are experienced, and maybe that's then the, where they're going to lean.
That's the litmus test.
Yeah. In this case, right, Pat and John, were just coming out of university.
Yeah.
Right? MIT and Harvard. And so who they knew were other students, right? Greg Brockman, their first hire, was also, just coming out of MIT. So who Pat knew was probably someone who, I don't know what their relationship was, but maybe it was someone who impressed him in classroom, maybe someone who they studied together, maybe they worked on projects together. I don't know what their history was, but we could all think about people who we went to school with, people who we worked with, right? People think about the Google talent bar as one talent bar, but people that work at Google, engineers, know if they're on a team of 10, who's the best person on that team, who's the weakest person on that team, right? I mean, Alexis and I, right? We worked on recruiting teams, right? Where there was someone that was better than someone else.
Yeah.
But from the outside, they all seem the same, but we know who's better, who's not better.
Yep.
And so do founders, right? And so go through that exercise, make the list of the top, and that becomes then the basis of who you go after and the talent bar you try to set for your startup.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Some really great insights, I thought, from this article. And I think the best part about it is this wasn't rocket science, which comes to the last point. Stripe's last point was trust your instincts, which is kind of cool because they're not saying that, this way is better than that way or our way is better than your way. They're saying you as a founder have an instinct around what it takes for you and your team to be successful, and trust that instinct. Stripe found that it was often right for them. How does instinct play out, right? If you think that someone's probably not going to be good, but maybe logic tells you to hire them, and then that person ends up not being good, you should have been I should have trusted my instinct, right?
Yeah.
Or if you decide to pass on someone for a reason, but they go out and go do amazing things elsewhere, like, oh, I should have brought that person in. I should have, not gone with conventional wisdom or whatever it was. So trust your instincts. That those instincts are there for a reason. Trust them, go with them, and you'll probably find good things as a result.
Agreed.
Again, the good thing is that none of these techniques that Stripe used to build its early engineering team are rocket science. So any founders that are trying to emulate Stripe in the building of their team can use these tools and can apply these tools to building their early engineering team. So let's just go through them one final time. Treat recruiting like marketing, right? You have a bunch of different channels via which candidates can come through. Try them all, measure them all, double, triple down on the ones that are more effective for you. Write a great recruiting email, right? You won't be able to do better than the quality of that email. So invest in that. A recruiter could help you do that. Look to candidates to tell you why they're excited about your startup. Look to your team to tell you why they're excited about your startup. Use all that content to craft that early email. Don't take circumstantial evidence as authoritative. Just because Stripe has a good talent brand doesn't mean that everyone who comes from Stripe to you is going to be good, right? Devise a process to evaluate and figure out who's actually great for you.
Yeah.
Consider your version of the Sunday test. If this person were alone in the office on Sunday, would you be more or less likely to want to join them? Whatever that is for you. Airplane test, beer test, Lego test, whatever that is for you. The first hire in a new role or department is incredibly important. So when you're hiring that first person of any new function, just keep in mind that you probably won't hire better than them moving forward. Hire people instead of roles. Your startup isn't just what it's made up of today, right? But you want to hire people that can adapt and grow and evolve with your startup, and you have the chance to hire somebody great. Consider snagging them up, right? They could be a huge difference maker for you.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, trust your instincts, which could include dismissing all of these and following whatever other strategy you have in mind. But whatever instincts you have in building your startup, follow those. And I'm sure they'll treat you well.
Well said.
Well, thank you, Alexis.
Trust your instincts. I like it.
Well, we hope you enjoyed this episode of the First 10 podcast. If you do like this, we might find ourselves wanting to case study more startups and how they built their early teams. Maybe we'll have some leaders from those early startups join us and talk to us about how they build their early teams.
Yeah.
Maybe if the Collison brothers are listening to this or Greg Brockman's listening to this, maybe you'd like to join us and talk to us about how Stripe built its early team. I have a feeling that the market would enjoy hearing from you.
Yeah.
With that, we hope you enjoyed and have a great rest of your day.
See.
And that brings us to the end of this episode. Do let us know what you thought of our episode on our Twitter or LinkedIn. Look for the links in the show notes. Both Alexis and I are not professional podcasters, as I'm sure you could tell. We just love talking about early stage startups.
And if there's a recruiting related question you'd like answered, or you could use help with anything hiring related, jump on our website. It's www.first10.com. That's 1st10.com. And we'll do our best to get that answered for you.
Thank you so much for staying with us till the end. My name is Boris, and with me is
Alexis Munger.
And we'll see you next time on the First 10 podcast.
Bye.